start with this. It was officially announced yesterday that Chantel Cameron versus Katie Taylor's second fight will go down November 25th at the 3 Arena in Dublin, just like before.
And some are already tabbing this as Katie Taylor's last stand, potentially, that if she loses the second fight to Chantel, she might retire.
Chantel returns to the Lions Den to put her undisputed super lightweight world titles on the line for a second time against Irish legend Katie Taylor at the 3 Arena in Dublin on Saturday, November 25th, live worldwide on DAZN. Northampton's Cameron handed undisputed lightweight world champion Taylor the first defeat of her career to remain undisputed ruler at 140 pounds when they met on a historic night at a sold-out 3 Arena in Dublin back in May.
Those homecoming fights, man, they can be a doozy.
Like when former unified junior middleweight champion Jarrett Hurd had his big homecoming fight opposite the ring, Julian Williams.
Lost.
And he got his ass handed to him. Julian Williams, in turn, had a homecoming fight in Philadelphia. Then he got his ass handed to him by Jason Rosario.
What is it about homecoming fights?
I don't know. Regis Prograrius very recently had his, and he didn't look good opposite the ring late replacement, Danielito Zorrilla. Katie, obviously, her homecoming fight didn't go to plan either.
Regis at least won his fight. Katie suffered her first professional loss.
Chantel racked up a high-profile victory. Despite coming into the fight defending her belts, Cameron was seen as a major underdog for Taylor's first fight in Ireland in her 7-year professional boxing career. But the 32-year-old Brit stunned the hometown crowd by scoring a majority decision win over their hero. Can she win the second fight?
You know, a lot of people felt that there's no way Chantel goes to Ireland and wins on points.
No way.
There's no way she wins a decision. Not in Katie Taylor country.
No way.
And that's what makes her victory so impressive.
She was able to do that, but can she do it again? The same way that Devin Haney did it in Australia, his 2 fights with George Kambosos.
She repeat that performance, or can she improve upon it?
The last time around, I pulled off one of the best ever away wins against the best female fighter on the planet, said Cameron. To go over to Ireland, her homecoming with my belts on the line, and beat her was a brilliant experience. But beating her on November 25th will surpass that, as I know what to expect now. I've boxed at that high level with a huge amount of pressure on me and the crowd against me. Going into November 25th, I'm more than prepared this time. I know what it feels like now, and I'm going to go in there with more aggression and energy, and I'm confident of getting the job done in better fashion. I will admit that if the rematch would have been at 135 pounds as opposed to 140, Chantel's weight, Chantel's division, Katie would have stood a better chance.
Because Chantel hasn't made that weight in years, so perhaps she might have been a little bit depleted if it were at lightweight instead of super lightweight. Chantel actually said she's willing to move down. She's willing to move down and fight for Katie's belts instead of defending hers, but this is what Katie chose.
It's going to be at Chantel's weight. Chantel, who says, I'm going to be a lot better in the rematch. In the gym, we corrected mistakes that I've made. There were little things that I was doing during the first fight that led me to being headbutted a lot. That's why my face was very bruised at the end of the fight. Going back to Ireland to beat Katie Taylor twice in a row will show that it wasn't just a lucky night for me and an off night for Katie. I said it last time. I think I'm all wrong for Katie. I'm too big, I'm too strong, and my will to win is too strong. I'm going to be there all night long. Katie picked the wrong fighter to fight.
Ahead of that fight, I told you that Chantel's a big girl, that in terms of the tale of the tape, it doesn't seem like there's that much between them, but when they rehydrate and when those punches start to land, that's where you're going to see the difference.
Some people were questioning as to whether or not Chantel really was the bigger, stronger fighter. That's what they saw on the night. I'm delighted the rematch has been made and really can't wait for another huge night in November, said Taylor. I relish challenges like this, and these are the occasions I live for. Strap yourselves in for another electric night at the 3 Arena in Dublin as Chantel Cameron and Katie Taylor run it back for a super lightweight supremacy on Saturday night, November 25th, said Matchroom Sport chairman Eddie Hearn. The atmosphere inside that arena was one of the loudest and most special I've ever experienced in all my years in this sport, and I expect November 25th to be even better. Last time out, Chantel Cameron proved that she is one of the very best female fighters on the planet by handing Katie Taylor her first loss in the pro ranks. Katie will be desperate to avenge that loss, but Chantel is determined to prove that it wasn't a one-off. Don't miss this one, live and exclusive around the world on DAZN. Another massive fight to add to our ever-growing autumn schedule, said Alfie Sharman, VP of DAZN. There is nothing more dangerous than a motivated Katie Taylor. And after being defeated for the very first time in her pro career to a modern-day great in Chantel Cameron, I'm expecting fireworks. Tune in November 25th to watch live and exclusive only on DAZN.
You often hear me say that rematches are won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments. Even if that fighter loses the first fight, it's their ability to adjust that could win in the second. But in this situation...
In this fight, you have two multi-dimensional fighters. Two fighters with layered approaches. Two fighters that are able to adjust. So the outcome is not quite clear. Could Katie Taylor change a few things in the rematch? Of course she can.
So can Chantel.
Riding high and supremely confident off the biggest win of her career, we may get an even better version of Chantel's fight in the second fight than the one we saw in the first at the same time.
Because now she knows what works.
Are we underestimating Katie Taylor?
In the first Delphine Pursoon fight, Katie Taylor struggled greatly, but in the second fight, with a few adjustments, she was able to win a more clear victory, a more decisive victory.
Chantel's a lot more layered than Delphine Pursoon. That's the problem. There's more to Chantel than just putting the squeeze on her opponents, throwing punches and bunches, and applying pressure. She can be fleet of foot too, just like Katie.
With power.
Been a fan of Katie Taylor for a long time, but I gotta tell you that it's a tall ask.
She's got a work cut out for her.
Just in keeping with the theme of rematches, repeat, or revenge, Chris Eubank Jr. hires Brian Bomac McIntyre as his trainer for the Liam Smith rematch.
You know, rematches often being won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments. I questioned as to whether or not that fighter is Liam Smith or Chris Eubank Jr.
Because that'll tell the story. As BoxingScene.com previously reported, middleweight contender Chris Eubank Jr. parted ways with four-division world champion Roy Jones Jr., who worked as the boxer's head trainer for something like, 2 or 3 fights?
Yeah.
Eubank has now hired Brian Bomac McIntyre, best known for his work with undisputed welterweight champion Terence Crawford.
He also did a bit of work with former WBO super featherweight champion Jamel Herring, among others.
Last Saturday in Las Vegas, Crawford dominated and stopped Errol Spence Jr. to become the undisputed champion at 147 pounds. Can Brian Bomac McIntyre guide Chris Eubank Jr. to the victory the same way that he did Terence Crawford? Well, let's be honest.
What?
Chris ain't got Terence Crawford's ceiling, his ability, his gumption, and his resolve, and just that X factor that makes a special fighter a special fighter. Chris ain't that kind of guy.
He hasn't proven to be.
Does he really need to be of the ilk of a Terence Crawford to beat Liam Smith? Eubank is looking for a large measure of revenge when he faces former champion Liam Smith in a rematch on September 2nd in Manchester next month. Earlier this year, Smith pulled off a stunner when he knocked out Eubank in 4 rounds. Terence Crawford's whole team is actually now working with me, Eubank Jr. told Sky Sports. We're off to a great start. Obviously, we had an amazing result over the weekend and we were in the gym the next day, so I'm very happy.
I don't want to diminish Liam Smith's victory, but it's almost like Chris Eubank's chin completely evaporated, disappeared. And I think the catchweight in association with the Conor Benn fight is what ended up leaving him depleted ahead of the Liam Smith fight.
Chris Eubank Jr. is normally known for having a cast iron chin, being able to take a punch, and it's not like he hasn't seen a fighter like Liam Smith before. He has. He saw a fighter like Liam Smith in Liam Williams, and he beat him. He beat him easy, like everybody expected him to. This wasn't...
Ahead of the fight, most people expected that Chris would win.
I was definitely thinking about it, considering it, watching the way they work. Roy told me that he wasn't able to train me for this fight. He had other fighters and obligations, so the stars just aligned. Bomac was in town, and I thought, you know what? I like this guy. I like what he's doing with Terence. Let's see what he can do, Eubank said. He was ready. He said, listen,
Look.
boxing is my life, and as soon as this Spence fight is done, I'll be with you in the gym the next day, which is a sign of a great coach, someone that's willing to do that. So I'm excited to see how things work out.
Roy Jones Jr. was an amazing fighter. I mean, I grew up watching a guy's whole career.
He's an amazing guy, and I think he's pound for pound not just one of the best fighters the sport has ever seen, also one of the best commentators, one of the best analysts. I love hearing a guy talk about boxing, but when it comes to being a trainer, training fighters. That doesn't seem to be an area of strength for Roy, despite his best efforts. I mean, Chris Eubank Jr., Ikram Kerwat.
Maybe Roy would make a better mentor than a trainer, but as far as training fighters...
I just don't think that Roy is the same level of trainer that he was a fighter. I don't think that. It is refreshing to have a new perspective, a new lease on life, a new challenge. It's fitting for this fight because this fight is a new challenge. I've never fought somebody who has a win over me before, so everything's good.
It's encouraging that at least something has changed for Chris Eubank Jr. because I really wasn't sure if I liked his chances ahead of a second fight. Rematches often being won by the fighter that can make adjustments. I was a bit torn, ambivalent. Is that Chris or is that Liam?
I honestly felt like it really is Chris more than Liam. What you get from Liam, what you see is what you get. He's a mid-range to inside fighter, a slugger, a crafty one, a durable one, and an experienced one.
But he's a slugger. He is more brawler than boxer.
Not a guy that I would categorize as being all that cerebral. He's not that fighter that's going to stay on his toes bouncing around the ring, using it and setting traps. That's not Liam. That's actually Chris more than Liam. So now that he's got Bomac in his corner, I do like his chances a little better.
A little.
Liam Smith, he's not a guy that changes much in between fights, fight by fight. He's a good fighter. I'm not saying he's not a good fighter.
But how much do you expect him to change from the first fight till now?
Chris didn't get off to a bad start in that first fight, just moving around, throwing straight punches, so long as he can keep Liam Smith at arm's length.
Hope the nutrition is better for this fight.
Chris Eubank Jr. will need to be sharp, and in some ways, he can be a sharp puncher. I feel like Chris has at least better feet, more mobility than Liam Smith, and he's got to keep him on the outside. He's got to keep him outside of the pocket. The fight does seem a little bit more winnable with this recent addition to Chris's corner. I'm not expecting Bomac to perform a miracle here.
But it can make a difference.
And finally, preliminary viewing figures. Per Jan Raphael via his sources, Spence versus Crawford pay-per-view generated at least 650,000 domestic buys, grossing $55 million, with it quite possibly to get to 675,000. Add in a gate of more than $20 million, and the fight was a huge success. Both fighters will make at least $25 million apiece. Spence was entitled to a slightly higher percentage.
650,000 pay-per-view buys sold at a price point of approximately $84 brings you roughly $55 million at or around there. Tack on the 20 to 21 million they generated at the gate, and it was a lucrative night for everybody, even if the fight didn't go Errol Spence Jr.'s way.
That's roughly $75 million. 75 with what they got at the gate and what they generated on pay-per-view. That's a lot of money. A lot of money for everyone. And ahead of the fight, I questioned what it would do at the box office, hoping that it would do well so that it would send the right message out there to the fighters and the promoters and the broadcasters, the powers that be, that you can't substitute.
You've got to make the big fights that people ask you for. Don't look to substitute them with other fights or delay them needlessly.
Now this isn't quite as many pay-per-views sold as what Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis sold earlier this year, but it's still a successful event.
Adding to what is arguably Showtime's biggest calendar year, the biggest calendar year in recent memory I think they've had.
Given what's going on between Paramount and Showtime, Paramount Plus absorbing Showtime as a platform onto their own, Showtime needs to make their presence felt.
Their content.
Show their value. Terrence Crawford chimed in on his feelings towards Errol Spence Jr., saying, "I respect the hell out of Errol. This was never personal. I think the fans picking sides tried to make it personal, divide and conquer, two fighters going for the same goal. I never had any hatred towards Errol."
Being honest with you, my main issue with Errol Spence Jr. was that the fight hadn't got done. The fight hadn't got made, but let's not pretend that Errol and his supporters didn't drag Terrence Crawford's name through the mud.
They did.
For the last 5 years.
They belittled him, his fighting ability, his accomplishments so far, and pretty much anyone that had shared the ring with him.
They were trying to freeze him out.
Freeze him out of the welterweight division on the premise that the PBC had most of the familiar names and the familiar fighters, and they would be keeping everything in-house. I still believe that it wasn't their original plan to do do this fight, the reason that we got here is mostly because of Terrence and Errol.
Not so much Al Heyman, a Tom Brown, a Stefan Espinoza. Those guys would have been happy to see Errol continue to fight other people. Don't forget that they had a plan for him to move up in weight and take on Keith Thurman.
Don't forget that at the beginning of last year, the VP of Communications at the PBC said he didn't think anyone would buy this fight. He felt that it wouldn't be lucrative, that people would steal it.
They didn't have faith in the fight. They didn't want to do it.
But when push came to shove and Errol had to choose between Terrence Crawford and Keith Thurman, for once, he chose Terrence Crawford instead of putting it off like he'd been putting it off the last 5 years.
Because let's not pretend that he hasn't.
Good number of content creators now that were making a lot of money dragging Terrence Crawford's name in the mud are now feeling the pinch. A content creator here on YouTube that goes by the name Fanon Boxing stated, a lot of content creators getting very stressed because of the abuse they are receiving for having supported Errol Spence. If you Bud fans feel like stressing somebody out, I'm going to have a 5-hour live stream and invite any one of you to try that with me. Come get some.
Talk about the pot calling the kettle flat. For the last 5 years, it's been Errol's fans stressing everybody out.
You couldn't have a conversation about this fight in a civil manner, not with these guys. They'd resort to name-calling and personal attacks, threats.
They're still doing that because they're bitter.
Fanon continued, so see this clown face to the clown on the show. Don't hide behind your phone cyberbullying people. See you in the morning, showing your face and saying your name. You are a soprano, right? I am sure you'll be man enough to do it, right? I won't hold my breath, though, cyberbully.
Imagine Errol Spence Jr.'s fans accusing anybody else of cyberbullying.
For the last 5 years, I couldn't talk about this fight on any social media platform without 2 to 3 guys taking shots at me for backing Terrence Crawford to win, only so that when he does, they end up taking it even more personal.
They're emotional like that, childish like that.
650,000 pay-per-view buys may not be a million. It may not have sold what Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis sold, but it's still a great number. It's still a success.
And perhaps a part of that is that the fans have been at each other's throats for the last 4 to 5 years. I feel like that's really what kept the fight alive in a time when there was no reason to believe it would happen.
Remember, they offered the head of Errol Spence Jr. to Canelo Alvarez after 2021, after he knocked out Caleb Plant. And the VP of Communications said they didn't think anybody would buy this thing. They felt that people would steal it.
Which is likely why they offered Errol to Canelo.
Because they felt that that would make more money than this fight. But Canelo, he chose to go in another direction. And, one thing leads to another. Here we are.
Left to deal with the aftermath.
No, I don't pity any of the Spence fans. I'm not the least bit remorseful that those content creators that spent 4 to 5 years dragging Crawford's name in the mud, I don't feel the least bit remorseful that now they're getting stick.
It's no less than they deserve.
You backed the wrong horse. That's how it goes.